What's up guys, my name is Lucas, I'm a software engineer, and today we're going to talk about Docker Compose. So the idea of this class is that we can understand more concepts about Docker Compose and how we're going to use Docker Compose to create our containers. I have here the overview that what we're going to do in this class today. So we're going to talk about the network, we're going to see the application architecture that we're going to create. We're going to see Docker Common versus Docker Compose, and for this part we're going to do hands-on, and for the final we're going to talk about Dockerfile. Here we have the application architecture that we're going to create. So we're going to create three containers: Flask, MySQL, and Adminer. And it's important to us understand some concepts here. So to us be able to connect our container Adminer, for example, to MySQL DB container, we need to understand that these containers needs to be in the same network. And this is gonna work for Flask container too. For to do this, we need to create the network that is gonna be visible for our containers. Basically, our containers that we're gonna create needs to be run in the same network. And this image here, we have this example. So we have the network called app network that it's shared with our containers that we have here. And the next point that we have here is how can we access the Flask application, and at the same time you can access the Adminer application to manipulate some data information that you have in your database. So this is where we come to the point that we need to bind the ports of our containers. And for to do this, I have the examples here. So we're gonna bind the port 8000 in our host to our container Flask that is gonna be in port 5000. And the same we're going to do to Adminer. We're going to bind the ports and it's going to be in our host 8080, and the container Adminer is going to be in the port 8080 too. So doing this, we're going to be able to access the Adminer container and Flask container. Okay, now that we understand the application architecture, let's create the MySQL DB and the Adminer container. Before you create these containers, you're gonna see the comparison between we create this container using the commands and using Docker Compose file. And then my left side here, we have the commands that you're gonna use to create the containers. And in the right side, I literally have the commands that you're gonna use to create the same containers, but you're gonna use the Docker Compose. So now it's the time that we're gonna create our containers using the commands on the left side. So I open my terminal here and I'm going to start to type these commands that we have here. Docker network create app network. So what I'm doing here, it's exactly I'm creating the network that I'm going to be able to share that network with all my containers. And after this, that containers is going to be able to talk to each other. Okay, I create my network. Now I have to create my first container, and then now I'm going to create the MySQL container. For to do this, we need to type docker run the name of the container that we want. In our case, it's going to be MySQL DB. So the password for our database, MySQL, okay, root password example. Then I want to run this containing detach mode. Then I want to publish this content in the port 3306. Then the network that we're gonna use, it's exactly the network that we create before. In our case, it's the app network, the name of the network. So dash dash net, and then you need to pass here the name of the network, app network. Okay, and then you have to pass here the exactly image that you're gonna use. In your case, you're gonna use the MySQL in the latest version. Okay, so we're good to go. Oh, let me see. Okay, you already have a container here. So what I need to do is I need to remove that container, and then you can go ahead. Docker okay, that's clear. Let's run again, and here you go. You create our container here. To see, you can use the command docker ps. So we have our container here. Now what I need to do now is create our adminer container that is going to be able to connect to our MySQL DB container and manipulate some data there. But remember, we need to specify the network. Docker run, the name of our container is going to be adminer. Then we have to pass some variables, environment variables here. Adminer. Let me copy this. So we have here the variables, okay, the environment variables. So now we're gonna pass the -d, gonna publish in the port 8080, and then you're gonna use the network that you create before. And we're gonna pass the image that we're gonna use to create this container, in our case the adminer. So I think we're good to go. Something it's not working properly here. Let's see what is it. Oh, okay. It's interesting now that you don't have the image, the network. Okay, let me see, what is it. --net app. Okay, I just forget to put this here. Okay, now you have to remove that container because you already has one running here in our host, but I don't want to use that one. Okay, and then I think we are good to go now. Okay, no problem. So now you're gonna have two containers running to check docker ps. So we can see here the names of our container, okay, and have our two containers running here. And what we want to do is that we want to go to our web browser and access our adminer container. Then doing this, we're going to be able to manipulate or access our database and create tables, delete tables, and to do anything that you want to do in our database. So I have here my web browser, and I already type localhost port 8080, and I have the access for the adminer. What I need to do here is the literally the pass the username, in your case it's root, and the password it's example. So click in the button, login, and here we go. So we are able to access our database container MySQL DB using the adminer container. And the reason that you are able to do this, it's because you create the app, you create the network. So basically everything that you did here, we use the commands to create these two containers and to access the MySQL DB using the adminer. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna do the same process. We're gonna create these two containers, but the way you're gonna do this, it's using the Docker Compose file. So now we're gonna create the same two containers, but we're gonna use the Docker Compose idea. For to do this, we need to be able to create a file, and inside this file we're gonna type some configurations. We're gonna do some configurations, and then the Docker Compose is gonna be able to create the two containers for us. So in our case here, I already have the file. So and I specify the name here, Docker Compose.yaml, but you can choose whatever name you wanna here. I'm going to type some configurations here. The first one is the version of that file. It is important to us to specify the version of this file. And the reason that it's important to us is specify the version of our Docker Compose file. It's because some of commands here, some of our configuration is not going to be working if you're not using the right version. So in our Docker Compose file, we need to specify the servers that we're gonna have. In our case, you're gonna have two containers, right? We're gonna have the MySQL DB and the adminer. Okay, another specification that we're gonna have here, it's the networking. So now what I need to do is we need to put that network in our containers that we have here. So for to do this, you just specify networking and the name of the network you want to use. And as you can see, we have the network for the container MySQL DB and for adminer container. So we have this specified to the image. In our case, we want to use the MySQL layers one, the image, for create this container. And then we have the environment configuration here. So in your case, you just set up the MySQL root password. And here we have the configurations for our adminer container. So we have the image that we're gonna use, and we have the ports that literally you bind here. Okay, so we have the environment here, and we have the adminer default server. That is the name that you need to pass here. It's the name of our container. We have the username and password. In your case, it's root and example. And then we have the network. Again, we need to put the network in the both containers. That way they're gonna be able to communication with each other, like we said before. Then we have here this command depends on, but you're not going to need this setup here. Okay, you can delete it. Okay, now that we have our Docker Compose file set up, only thing that you need to do is run the command docker compose up, and you need to run this command in the same directory that your Docker Compose file it is. Docker Compose, and now we're gonna waiting for the containers starting. Okay, now we have our two containers running, and you can check this doing the command docker ps. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our web browser, and you're gonna access our adminer container. So basically I already did this here, localhost port 8080, and you just can access our container MySQL DB, use the adminer. So again, the username root and the password is gonna be example. Here we go. We are able to access our container, and it's simple like this, guys. I just want to bring these two examples here for you guys, because in the first moment we create the two containers but using the commands, and now you create the same containers but using the Docker Compose. So the next point that we're going to talk about, it is Dockerfile. What is Dockerfile? Dockerfile is a text file that contains structure for build a Docker image. Basically, it's a blueprint for create a Docker image with all the necessary dependencies, configuration, and code. And here I have the Dockerfile example that we're gonna use to create a Flask application. So we're gonna create this Flask application in the next class, and then let's back here, and then what you can see is that for today we are able to create MySQL DB container and adminer container and connect these two containers. And the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna create the Flask application, and for create the Flask container we're gonna use that Dockerfile to create the image of Flask and to create the image our application, and then you're going to use that image that you create, and then you're going to create the Flask container, and this Flask container is going to be able to connect to our database MySQL, that is our container. And basically you're going to have all these three containers set up and connect to each other. Okay guys, thank you so much, and see you guys in the next class.